All right, morning, y'all.
Morning.
Hope y'all are well. You only got 3 weeks of school left. And the last last week, you probably don't have a whole lot that you have to do. For us, today is May the 3rd, and that means that AP exams start next week. So this is the last day where I'm going to have like most of my students in class. Some of our art students are out like uploading their portfolios and stuff, or gathering, whatever you do. They're getting their portfolios together. So here's kind of what we have left. I might have told you before, as we get closer to the AP Bio test, it's sort of like student choice. So pretty soon, if there's topics that you guys want, we can talk about those. And then our test is week 2 on Thursday. If you're curious when certain tests are, you can go to the College Board website. But I've also got them posted right here. And I'll also scroll through them up here if you want to. So let's see, today's Friday. So next week on Tuesday morning, what test is going on Tuesday morning? Human geography and micro. So that probably won't impact this class at all. I doubt any of you guys are taking human geography, and I don't think we offer micro, do we? Isn't it macro? Yeah. So anyway, that's kind of the schedule. On Monday, if you're a senior, you might be taking government. That's the first one, so good luck on government. And they usually have some of the big ones the first week, like lit, government, macro, U.S. history, all of those. And then we are the second to last day, or biology, in the afternoon. And I have on my thing to arrive at 11:30. You don't actually have to get there at 11:30. If you got there at, say, 11:40 or whatever, you'll probably have enough time to get going. But we're actually supposed to be, like, at noon, like, reading directions, like, finishing up directions, and, like, getting you pretty much ready to go. So by noon, we should all be, like, in our assigned seats, and, like, they're up there, and they're like, today you'll be taking the AP Biology test. That type of thing. They can pause the test for a little bit. If you're coming from Spanish, Spanish is before hours. I think I have 3 students maybe that are taking Spanish. So if Spanish is running late, we might hold for a little bit. But we absolutely have to, like, you guys have to start, not I read the directions, but like you guys have to start the test between 12 and 1 or it's invalid. So that's why sometimes you're like, hey, my friend, they slept in and they're on their way. It's like, sorry, man. When can they take it? Next year. You can pay another $100 and you can take it next year. So the only time that they have makeup exams is College Board accepts hospitalization and conflict. So sometimes they have 2 tests going at the same time. Like ours used to go at the same time as music theory. And so if you're taking music theory and bio, then obviously you have to take like one of them as a late exam. But sleeping in is not valid. You have to have a doctor's note if you're taking the late one. Any questions about AP tests? I realize a lot of you guys might have taken them before.
Is it free response or the
multiple choice is first for us. So I know that's different from how I do it in class. I do free response in class first just so I can get a head start on like grading. But you guys will do the multiple choice. And I looked up because they change a little bit every year. So I looked up the instructions just to see what was up. And so this is like what they'll read. So if I was like giving the AP Bio test, you know, read the statement on the front cover of Section 1 booklet, sign your name, and write today's date, all that kind of crap. And so what they'll do is they are supposed to write the start and stop time. So let's say that we started now at, say, 9:35. And so then they'd have the stop time. That'd be like 11:05. And then they'll basically say go, and then they'll only interrupt you once when there's 10 minutes left. So the reason I tell you that is, you know how when we were in class on our mock exams, about halfway through, I'd be like, all right, you're about halfway through. You should be on like number 30 right now or whatever the heck. They don't do that. They're basically like go, and then the next time they talk to you is when you have 10 minutes left. That's on the multiple choice and the free response. So they'll be like go. 50 minutes later, I'm sorry, 80 minutes later, they'll be like, you got 10 minutes left, and then they'll say stop. Between the multiple choice and the free response, you do get a 10-minute break, and it is okay to have food or snacks or whatever. They'll have you go and like eat your food or snacks kind of out in the little like, not the lobby, it's like the hallway. Our test is in the gym, so just that kind of hallway in front of the gym. They'll have you like eat snacks, go to the bathroom, get a drink, whatever. And then 10 minutes later, they start up the free response, and then same thing. They're going to say, they're at the start and stop time. They'll say go, and then when you have 10 minutes left, they'll be like, you got 10 minutes left, and then they'll say stop. Typically, so the test is 3 hours, and then the 10-minute break, so it's 3 hours and 10 minutes. Tack on 30 minutes of directions and crap. So I would assume that the test will be about 4 hours. So if you get started at like 12:30, 12:15, then you'll be done at like 4:15, maybe as late as 4:30. So just keep in mind, like, you might still be here when school gets out by a little bit. So if you need to arrange rides or whatever. But if I had to guess, I'd say you'll be leaving there at 4:15. Any other kind of basic questions about AP exams? Huh?
So for the I guess for the morning and for the morning ones, you just like take the test, and then the rest of the day you just go on with the day.
Yeah. So like, for example, pretend like most of my students are not taking the Spanish test before hours. So I'd go to school, I'd go to first period, I'd go to, I think it's an odd day. I'd go to first period, I'd go to third period, and then whenever like it starts getting close to time, then I like leave and go take the AP Bio test. No, you basically just leave. So what will happen is, based off of how your lunch goes in your other classes, like you can eat lunch. So normally most of you guys probably have like the last lunch, but you can take like an earlier lunch. So you can tell your teacher, let's say you're in third period, and third period's over, and you would normally go to fifth. But instead of going to fifth, you'll go to like first lunch and then the AP Bio test. Because fifth period starts at, fifth period starts at like 11:10. So if you go to first lunch at 11:10, stay there until like 11:30ish, and then about 11:30 start making your way towards the gym for the AP Bio test, you'll be good. And they will code you in as like, it's okay that you missed fifth period. But if you miss first period, then that's an absence. Yeah, so like first and third, they expect you to be there, and then after that, you're excused from your other classes. And then the way that they take roll, so your teacher's going to count you absent in like your English class or whatever, but then when you sign in down there, they go back a day later and like override all those absences. So you'll look like you were absent for a day maybe. Huh?
And when we're taking like the free response questions, are they gonna like after 25 minutes they're like, oh, you have to move on to the next one, or they just like get
No, for AP Bio, they're just like, go. And then 80 minutes later, they're like, you got 10 minutes left. So you might be like, well, my history teacher said that the history test is totally different. The history test, they might tell you, you should spend this much time on each question. They might halfway through tell you you're halfway done. So they're all unique. About the only thing that's really consistent from one to the other is if you have a multiple choice section and free response, you always do multiple choice first. Then you get a little bit of a break, and then free response. And I think it's always a 10-minute break. But yeah, for us, they're just going to be like free response, go. For you guys, here's the general breakdown of about how long you should spend on the free response. The first two questions are 8 to 10 points each. So, and then they always average out to 9. So I get 90 minutes for free response. So I'd like to spend about 25 minutes on each of these, and then about 10 on each of these that are worth 4 points. It's not perfect. Technically, free response question number 1 might be worth 10, and number 2 might be worth 8, but I won't know that. Like, you won't know it while you're taking it. But if I did know that, I'd spend a little bit more time on this one, a little bit less on this one. So if you're going somewhere around 25 minutes on each of those and about 10 on each of those, that's your 90 minutes. So. Yeah, okay, so some things that we do know. What I should have done was color-coded stuff that was absolutely certain, and then what is like my guess. So what I'll do is I will underline in orange something that's my guess. or circle. Everything else up there is like a guarantee. So question number 2, that's not that I think you're going to graph. Like they've told us, you're going to graph. Now, all they've told us about some of the other ones is pretty vague. But like number 2, you're going to make a graph. And historically, that graph has been worth 3 points for doing the graph and 1 point for like interpreting what the graph means. And that's like question number 2, and it's always even been part B. So like I'm predicting question 2, part B, you graph and interpret it, and that's worth 4 points of that question. Yeah. Question number 6, they haven't said this, but all previous 3 years, it's always been molecular genetics. They've never said that. I've just observed it. So if it happens this year, then now I'm like, all right, last one's molecular genetics. But 3 years in a row seems like more than just random chance. I didn't run a chi-square or anything. Here in the middle, they pretty much always drop in something ecology, and a lot of that is sort of a logic type question to where most of you guys, as long as you aren't running out of time, you'll be able to kind of just work your way through it. And you'll always be like, there's this random question about like birds and this and that, and was it hard? And you're like, not really, it was just weird. Like I felt like just felt like it was a logic question. Like I didn't really have to know that much biology. And then in here between 3, 4, and 5, they seem to always hit cellular respiration or enzymes the most, sometimes photosynthesis, sometimes 2 out of the 3. So, yeah. Other questions? Yeah, so we get, for multiple choice, we get 60 questions at 90 minutes, and then the free response are these 6 questions at 90 minutes, and then in the end, they weight them all so that it's equal. So 50% of your total grade comes from multiple choice and 50% from free response. Any others? Especially if, like, AP exams are new to you. Huh?
Do we need to bring anything like a black pen or something?
Yeah, so as far as what to bring, they'll have some extras there, but you want to bring, they said no photo IDs. We don't have any homeschool kids taking them, so we know you guys. So, like, I'm going to be helping check you in, so you won't need a photo ID. Bring some pencils for the multiple choice, and then for free response, you're supposed to have dark pens, like blue or black.
Does it matter what type or?
For pencil, I would go number 2 pencil, because that's how they calibrate their readers, so now you know it'll work. For pens, the only thing that's kind of weird is some felt pens, I know on my phone, well, no, that's bubbling in. So yeah, as long as it's dark, it's fine. Because what they're going to do is scan, like they're going to scan your free response, and then the person that grades is reading your scan. So if you have like a really, really light pencil that you write with, it might not scan so well. Yeah, if it's like this brand or that brand or something like that. Basically, as long as it writes dark enough that if I throw it on a copier, it'll look okay. Especially if you have messy handwriting, it's even more important. Yeah. Are you currently in a math class? I am, but who is it? Okay. I bet Brian Ryan would, especially if you said it's like for AP Bio, because he's a little bit more likely. He teaches like on-ramps and stuff like that, and so there's a, what? Yeah, you're done with that, and he would also be like, if you're in AP Bio, he automatically would probably trust you more, compared to like, I'm a senior, taking the biology star for the 7th time. It's like, no, I'm not giving you a calculator. Like, so I bet you could. But yeah, if you hit up a math teacher ahead of time, all the math tests are done. UT classes are done. Thank you for reminding me about that. But then even like AP Calc and all those AP exams, like all the math ones are done. Physics is the following day. So like Miss Skull might not be willing to part with her calculators because she's going to need them like the following day for physics. I don't know. Does Kim has calculators. You don't need a graphing calculator, so you might even be able to hit up like your old chemistry teacher. Dawson, I'm sure, would loan you one. So yeah, I'd probably go Mr. Ryan. Do you know who he is? He's their department head. I don't know. Do you guys have any recommendations on that? Do you have math teachers where you're like, oh, so-and-so would totally let you borrow a calculator? Yeah. DeLeon, yeah, the stats teacher, she's super nice too. Do you know who she is? Oh, okay. Okay. I'll ask. So I'm friends with both of them. I'd imagine if I vouch for you, you'll be good. Other questions? On test day, I will have my like giant vat of these, but I've got like 60 of these, and there's 100 students testing. So like if we run out, then you're calculator-less. So if you can borrow one, that's better. And again, you don't need a graphing calculator, but you probably want something that's not that bad. Yeah, oh, thank you so much. So one thing that helps as far as phones and all that, instead of doing all the like put your name on your phone, if you want to bring your backpacks in here, put your phones in here. My 9th grade class is first period only, so none of them are going to be in here. So like if you drop your stuff off 5th period, my 5th period's AP Bio. My 7th period's AP Bio. So it's going to be a ghost town. So I'll be up here. 90% of my students are taking the test. So when your bags are in here, it's going to be me and like 2 or 3 students in 5th period, like 2 students in 7th period. And then 8th period, it's just me. So yeah, they actually prefer if you like leave your stuff up here. Take snacks with you, but like your backpack and phone and stuff, it's better if you leave it up here. Mm-hmm.
And if you bring a water bottle, how about your desk?
So there, you can leave it at the front of the gym, and then you can like grab it and drink from it on your way out during your break, and then like leave it there. But they don't let you have anything at your desk. You can't have gum at your desk. If it's already in your mouth, fine. Jolly Rancher, if it's already in your mouth, fine. But like, you can't have like a little mint on your table. College board is strict.
I love not drinking water.
Hmm?
Can you go to the bathroom during like the 10-minute break?
You can go during the 10-minute break. You can go in the middle of the test, but they don't stop the test for you. So yeah, you can go to the bathroom. But you can drink before. You can drink during your 10-minute break. So you just can't drink during that 90 minutes. You'll be fine. I don't think anybody's going to dehydrate indoors in an hour and a half. Anything else? Cool. All right. I think that's it for announcement stuff. The last after-school review is Tuesday next week. We don't do one the last week. And then the last thing that's actually due in here for a grade, you've taken all your quizzes and tests and stuff. So the only other thing that's due is the class before the AP Bio test. Your ultimate review is due. And if you want to use it to study, then you can like turn it in that class. I can get them graded and like give them back to you before you leave. So if you wanted to use it to study that night or whatever, that's cool. But I'll see you guys on the 15th, and then the 16th is the test. After the AP Bio tests, we don't do anything. There's not much time anyway. There's only 5 more school days after the AP Bio test. 4 more school days after the AP Bio test. All right, cool. So today, we've got a free response question that I want you to work on. And then we'll do like a little bit of reteaching on some Hardy-Weinberg stuff. I'll give you like a couple of Hardy-Weinberg practice problems. And then that'll be pretty much it. Then we'll head out for one of our last weekends before the year's over. So I do have this on paper. So I'll put it up here. But you've also got it on paper. And I'm using this one on purpose since this is the last time that I'll basically be guaranteed to see most of my students because of AP tests. I picked this one on purpose. This is question 2 from a few years ago, and this is one of the ones where it makes you graph. So I wanted to make sure, since we know that that's something you're going to have to do, and we know that it's going to get you 4 out of, say, 9 points, we definitely want to practice that. So if you're at home and you're looking for this, this is 2021 question 2. So if you just Googled AP FRQ released or something like that, or released FRQs, it'll get you there. There you go. All right, so on this one, anytime we've been doing practice free response in class, I'm like, hey, don't worry about writing complete sentences, just sort of like scratch out your answers. That's cool. except for part B. So on this one, on part B, pretend that it's like a test grade. So do part B full strength. Part A, go ahead and answer it. C and D, go ahead and again, like kind of do your little brief answers. But like part B, the graphing part, do that full strength like it was a test grade. All right, I'll pause the video for you guys at home. But again, if you go AP Bio, free response 2021, number 2. There you go. So I wanted to make sure that you could graph, and then also pedigrees kind of like pop up big and then kind of fade, pop up big, kind of fade. So some years there's like 1 point on pedigrees, and then other years it seems like there's several points on pedigrees. And so pedigrees are kind of high on my list of like what I think might be sort of big this year. Some stuff's easy to predict because it's always all over the test. Cellular respiration is always on there a good amount. But pedigrees are kind of high-low. So I'm predicting pedigrees are going to be kind of big this year. Okay, so I got this pedigree, and normally with a pedigree, one of the things is I have to figure out what kind of inheritance it is. So the 4 most common scenarios would be like regular Mendel inheritance, autosomal, dominant, or recessive. And then the other 2 would be sex-linked, dominant, or recessive. But with this one, they told me it was caused by a mutation in mitochondrial DNA. The disorder arose in individual 2-2, so that's this lady, and it was caused by a mutation in mitochondrial DNA. So that's going to be significant in a second. On the question 2s that I've looked at, we have 3 years worth. Here's what I've kind of noticed. Part A is usually just straight ahead biology, and it's biology that you guys should be solid on. And part A typically doesn't even require that I read the rest of the stuff. So like I don't have to have looked at this data table, the other data table, or even read the opening paragraph much. So for part A, it's normally just like 1 or 2 points of just straight ahead biology. So it says the disorder alters glucose metabolism. Okay. Describe the atoms and the types of bonds in a glucose molecule. Like, describe the atoms. So what atoms do make up glucose? Yeah, CHO. So I'll be like, all right, it's made out of CHO, or I might be like, well, I've got 6 carbons and 12 hydrogens and 6 oxygens. It's C6H12O6. Describe the atoms. I mean, I feel like I just listed the atoms. Describe protons and neutrons are in the nucleus. The protons are positive, the neutrons are neutral, and I guess the electrons are kind of like in a shell or a cloud around there. Is that what you want for description? This is what I would put if I was you and I didn't see the rubric yet. So what will happen is you guys will take the test the 16th, and then about the time you guys are done, so let's say 4 o'clock, other time zones, 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock, they release them about 48 hours after the last state finished it. So by like, say, Saturday night, Sunday morning, they'll release the questions. We won't have the rubrics until later. The rubrics don't even exist yet. But they'll release the questions. And so I'll be able to look at it, and that's what I would have written as my answer. And I'd be like, describe the atoms. Okay. And then I'm also supposed to describe the bonds. So what kind of bonds hold together glucose? Yeah, covalent. And what's the definition of a covalent bond? Sharing electrons. So I'd be like, all right, glucose is made out of atoms of 6 carbons, 12 hydrogens, and 6 oxygens. And protons are in the nucleus with neutrons. The protons are positive, neutrons are neutral, and electrons are kind of in a cloud and on the outside, in orbitals, however you want to say it, and they're negative. And then they're held together by covalent bonds, which is sharing pairs of electrons. So now, if you're like, what did they actually want? Well, in the actual rubric, grab it and bring it over here. That's it. If I knew that there was CHO They were held together by covalent bonds. They gave me a point. Who'd have thought? So to me, that doesn't seem like describe. Describe, I felt like I should write more. So I would have written more than I needed. All right, next up. They tell me that I am supposed to use the template in the space provided. That's that little grid paper thing that I have on there. For your response, construct an appropriately labeled graph based on the data. That'll be 3 points. And then for point number 4, determine one individual who's both at risk of developing the disorder and has a significantly different blood glucose level from that of individual 4-1. So whenever I graph it, there'll be 3 points available historically for actually just drawing the graph correctly. This is the first year that I've ever seen them not care about a title. So every other year, if you didn't have a title, you'd be missing out on one of the points. So this year, 2021, if you had your axes labeled correctly and in the right spot, you got a point. So I should have average blood glucose level, and then my units are, it looks like milligrams per deciliter. And then over here, I just have individuals. And there's not really any unit for that. Like, it's kind of like if I said people, and you're like, what's the unit? And you're like, number, like number of people. Like, this is person 41, 42. So that's why that doesn't have units. When in doubt, if it just bothers you, anytime I don't know what the units are, if it was like individuals, then I just put like, you know, like number, like it's a number. Okay, so that's a point. Next up, did you do a bar graph? If not, you missed out on that point. So as a general rule, you either need to be doing like plotted lines with a best fit line or a bar graph. About half the time it's one, about half the time it's the other. So how do I decide when to use a bar graph versus when to do something that's more like, you know, like that? How do I know when to do a line graph versus a bar graph? There's sort of like a general rule that works almost always. How do I decide? Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Individuals, and then it's like a measurement for each of them. You can't measure like the X, just like a category.
Yeah. So again, stats. Okay. So the way that stats teacher would say is like, this is categorical data, and you might be like, cool. What? So you're exactly right. This is categorical data. It's not one person changing over time. So the way that I think of it is if this is data that I just take a picture of once and that's it, then I need a bar graph. If it's data that's changing, like, for example, let's say that I was like, hey, I want to know how tall everybody is. And so let's say I got 20 students in here, and I just go around, and I'm like, individual one. So Saeed is this tall, and Sydney is this tall. And I just go around, and I like have like 20 students, and here's how tall they are. And it was just a one shot. It's almost like a picture of, at this moment, click, how tall is everybody? That's a bar graph. If you were looking at how my height changed from age 5 to 10 to 15 to 20 to 25, then that would be a line graph. That's one thing changing over time. So when things are changing over time, or when things are changing, it doesn't have to be over time, but they're changing over pH range or something like that, that's a line. But if it's just a one-shot deal, then you generally do a bar graph. All right, error bars. The error bars look like this. That's what they look like. We've seen them here, there, a little bit in this class, but that's how I draw the error bars. So now that you know what they're supposed to look like, I bet you could figure out what they were supposed to be on this graph. So like if I go back and I look at this. So I'm not going to fill out like every single part of my graph here. Let me switch over to that camera. I'm not going to fill out like every single line, but like individual 1 goes up to 170. So let's say that right here was 170. And so there's my bar, plus 15, minus 15. So it's 170, but my error bars go as high as 185. That's plus 15. and they go as low as 170 minus 15. So they go down to 155. That's how I put the error bars on there. My next guy looks like he's at 190. So that's how tall my bar is going to be. It's at 190. So let's say that right there is 190. And then plus 10 minus 10. So I'll have error bars that go as high as 200 and error bars that go as low as 180, like that. So that's how I do the error bars. All right, so if I did a bar graph with error bars and I put them in there correctly, then I'm good to go. And, okay, so did I do axes? Did I plot it on a bar graph? And then did I do the error bars correctly? Those are my 3 points. Next up, the next thing that they ask is this. One individual is both at risk of determine one individual who's both at risk of developing the disorder and has a significantly different blood glucose level from that of individual 4-1. It's highly likely when they ask you the graphing question that you're going to have 3 points on graphing, and then the 4th point is going to deal with these error bars. So they're going to ask, is this person significantly different from this person or not, and explain how you know. So I'm trying to find who's significantly different from person number 1. So here's person number 1, 4-1. Right here. Here's person number 2. Person number 2, obviously that bar is higher. Is this statistically significant, the difference between these two? No. How do I know that it's not? Yeah, that error bar and that error bar overlap. So they might call them error bars, they might call them confidence intervals, that's the same thing. So since these error bars and these error bars overlap, mathematically, I'm actually not that confident that this guy really is having a higher blood glucose level. All right, what about individual 3? Is individual 3 different from individual 1? Yep, and I say yes, because these error bars do not overlap these error bars. So those are different. Person number 4, that's the same. And then these guys are all lower. Those error bars don't overlap with any of these. So I start off and I'm like, all right, who all is statistically different? Person 3, 5, 6, 7, 8. But they ask, determine one individual who is both at risk and different. So to be at risk, it looks like my blood glucose level had to be at risk, had to be between 140 and 199. 140 to 199. All right, so now let me go back, look at my graph again. All these guys are statistically different, 8, 7, 6, 5, and 3. But aren't these guys not at risk? Isn't that guy like too low? He's not in the 140 to 199 range. 140 is right here. Aren't all these guys below 140? So none of them are at risk. However, he is. So he is in the 140 plus range. So he is at risk and statistically different from number 1. So it should be individual 3. So if I look at my rubric, individual 4-3. Now, if you just said individual 3, they would give it to you because obviously every individual is 4- something. So I don't think that you would have to say 4-3. I think if you just said 3, you'd be good to go. All right, now, we're going to come back to part C and part D in just a second. But so far, we've had 5 points. This was an 8-point question. We know that it's going to be between 8 and 10. It happens to be 8. You don't know that when you're taking it, but we know it now. So we've got 5 points done. There's 3 points still left. Like, all right, well, what are the grades like on this thing? Like, what's the average student get out of 8 on this? Like, obviously 8's great. Like, 7's got to be really good. Like, does the average kid get 6 or a 5 or a 4 or a 3 or a 2? What do you think average is? By the way, average is just above a 3. So if you are dead center average, if you're at the 50th percentile, you'll get a 3. So what do you think the average is on this question? We've got 5 points we've talked about so far. We haven't talked about the last 3. What do you think the average was in the world in 2021 on this? You got to vote for 5, a vote for 6, 3, 5, 4, 4, 5. First I was like 9. You're like, wow. Yeah, I got you. No, you're saying 4 or 5, yeah. 4s, 5s, 5s, 4s. Well, we can look it up. So if you want, sometimes students will be like, hey, Mr. Cotton, I know we did a practice test for multiple choice in class. What if I want to do practice free response? What can I do? You can really just Google AP Bio released FRQ. The first hit is there. This isn't through AP Classroom. So like your 10-year-old brother that's not in AP Classroom could get onto this. So I'll click on it, and it's got past questions for many years, 2023, 22, 21, 2019, 18, like way back. So this was 2021. So if I click on it, it'll give me the questions, of course, so I can see what the questions were. And that's what we're looking at right now, like we're at question 2. So all of a sudden you're like, oh yeah, that's our question 2. So I can look at the whole test if I want. I can also look at the scoring guidelines. So if I wanted to like time myself and test myself and I like answer it and then I want to grade it myself, I can look at the scoring guidelines. And it'll tell me this is worth a point, that's worth a point, this is worth a point. All right, cool. But there's one other thing that's interesting. Scoring stats. I can see how did students do on this. The average was a 3.17 on the 8-point question we're looking at. By the way, doing the graph correctly is 3 points. Interpreting the graph correctly, like where do the things overlap and all that, that's a 4th point. Knowing that glucose had CHO and was held together by covalent bonds, that's a 5th point. We haven't even talked about the other 3 yet. The average was a 3.17. Standard deviation is 2, so that means usually if you're 1 standard deviation over, you're somewhere in the 4 range. So students that ended up getting 4s, they probably got like a 5, 5.5 on this. We don't know it from this, but based off of my guess, I would say students that ended up getting 5s, they got about, say, 6.5 on this, something like that. Question 1, we haven't looked at it yet, but it was worth 10 points. The average was a 3.7. These are all 4 points each, and the averages ranged from like 1.25 to about 1.5. So I tell you this now. I don't tell you way earlier in the year, because then you'll be like, this will be easy. But I tell you this now so that if you go in there, if all of a sudden you get to like part D of some question and you're like, I don't know what's going on, nobody gives a crap. It doesn't matter at all. Skip it and move on. And don't let it haunt you. While you're on question number 4, you're like, I still don't know what's going on number 1, part D. It doesn't matter. You don't have to know that much. All right. So now, let's go back and look at our grading rubric. Next up it asked, based on the pedigree, identify all individuals in generation 4 who can pass on the mutation to their children. This is what separates 5s and 4s. So they'll have something in there that's pretty tricky. Based on the pedigree, identify all individuals in generation 4 who can pass on the mutation to their children. So let's go back and look at that pedigree. So who all in generation 4, it looks like I got 8 folks, who all can pass it on to their future kids? All right, the mutation is in mitochondrial DNA. So where do I get my mitochondrial DNA from always and only? My mom. My mitochondrial DNA only comes from mom. It's not nuclear DNA. So my mitochondrial DNA, barring mutation, should be identical to my mom's, which is identical to my grandma's on my mom's side. which is identical to my great-grandma's on my mom's side. So you get your mitochondrial DNA from your mom. You have two sets of DNA in you. You have your nuclear DNA. That was where like sperm and egg met, and that makes your nuclear DNA. But you also have mitochondrial DNA, and it's different. So you have two genomes in your cells. All right. So they told us this, but if they hadn't told us this, we could figure it out because there's a female that has the disease, and she gives it to every single one of her kids. Male or female, doesn't matter. They all got it. So now, the question was, which individuals in this generation, 1 through 8, which one of those can pass it on to their kids? So, first off, I'm going to ask you a different question. Which one of these even has it? Obviously, if they don't have it, they can't pass it on. So, does this child have the disease? Yes. And how do I know that? Because her mom has it, so she has it. What about person 2? Yep. What about person 3? Thank you. Yep. What about person 4? Yep. Why do I know that? Because their moms have it. So all of those kids have it. What about person 5? Nope. Because dad has it. Only mom passes it on. So person 5 and person 6 don't even have it. Person 7 and 8, obviously they don't have it because neither of their parents do. So who has the disease? Person 1, 2, 3, and 4. They asked who can pass it on to the next generation. So can person 1 pass it on to the next generation? Yep. What about 2? Yep. What about 3? No, because that's a male. So 1, 2, 3, and 4 have it, but number 3 is a dad, so he can't pass it on. So who can pass it on? Person 1, 2, and 4 only. So if we went and saw the stats on how many people got that one right, that would separate, like, students that got that right likely went on to get like 5s. Pretty much everybody else missed it. So they will always have questions. We always need questions to separate 1s from everybody else and 2s from 3s. But we also need questions that separate 4s and 5s. So there are questions that like 5%, 6, 7% of the population get right. So on the AP Bio test, only about 7% or so get 5s. So there you go. Nationwide. All right, next up. So yeah, individuals 1, 2, and 4. Next up, based on the fact that individual 2-2 is affected, so 2-2 is affected, a student claims that the disorder is inherited in an X-linked recessive. Based on the student's claim, predict which individuals of generation 3 will be affected by the disorder. Now, is it X-linked? No. They told us it's mitochondrial DNA. But the student says, hey, I think it's X-linked. So if that's true, who in generation 3 will be affected? So give it a shot. All right, so this student says, hey, I think it's X-linked recessive because of this. Well, if that's true, who out of these 4 kids should be affected? Well, if it's X-linked recessive, males versus females. Are females XY or XX? Yeah, females are XX. Males are XY. All right, well, if it's X-linked recessive, then capital G is good, and little g is bad. You've got the disease. Let me flip over to this camera. All right, so mom must have it. So she's little g, little g. Looks like dad is fine. So he's got a good one. He's got a capital G. His other chromosome is a Y. So if this were the case, all the girls would be fine because all the girls are getting a capital G from dad. So 100% girls, they're good to go. What about the males? Males, they're all screwed. All of them are inheriting the mutated version. So 100% of boys, bad. So they want to know, who in the next generation would get the disease. I think that's how they asked it. So it looks like person number 4 would have it. Person number 8 would have it. The girls, 2 and 6, would not. So 4 and 8 would have the disease. Again, I think they asked who would have it. Yeah. So 4 and 8 are the ones that could have the disease. So next up, they then ask, all right, how do you know, based on the pedigree, justify why the data does not support the student's claim? And you'd be like, well, the student's claim was that 4 and 8 would have it. But according to the data, they said based on the data, according to the data, 2 and 4 and 6 and 8 have it. So the student is wrong. So according to the student, they say this. According to the data, it says 2, 4, 6, 8. According to the student, it's 4 and 8. According to the data, it's 2, 4, 6, 8. And that's the answer. They're basically trying to get you to make a statement and back it up with your data. So anytime you make a statement that's lab related, especially, try to always back it up with data. All right. How was it overall? Now that we've gone through it, is it horrible or is it not too bad? When you're in it, it's pretty tough. But when you go through and you look at it, it's all reasonable stuff. So remember that. If you're getting to a question and something seems completely ridiculous, it's probably not. You're just not thinking about it the right way. All right. Any questions on that? Okay, and by the way, when we were kind of looking at this data, you're like, well, was 2021 just like a really tough year? Those scores seem lower than I was expecting. No, I can do this year after year. I can be like, all right, let's look at the data for 2022 free response. Again, I can look at the questions, I can look at the grading rubrics, and I can look at the scoring stats. It was even harder in 2022. Look at that. The questions were 9 points each, and students were scoring like between 2.25 and 2.8. So like, for me to be in line for a 3, I need 5 points on the first 2 questions out of 18 points. The average on this question was a 1. That one was a 1. These are 1.5s. So for me to be looking at a 3, I need, we'll call that 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. I need like a 10.5. The first 2 questions alone have 18 points available on them. So you're probably in pretty good shape. So don't freak out. If something happens and you run out of time and you don't get to number 6, doesn't matter. Average person was only going to knock down 2 points anyway. By the way, though, number 6, molecular genetics, we should be pretty strong on molecular genetics. So, all right, any questions about free response stuff? Mm-hmm.
How do they have it so it's like, oh, this person gets
A 5, a 4, 3, 2. So for the AP Bio test, they're all different. So if you ask Mr. Roach, he might give you totally different numbers for U.S. history. For AP Bio, a 5 is about an 82, 83%. And then they kind of go from there. And you're like, well, how do they decide that? So what they do is they do these college studies. So they take these questions and they give them to professors. The students don't know that they're AP questions. And those professors, big schools, small schools, schools down here in Texas, schools up north in Massachusetts, private, public, expensive, cheap, whatever. 4-year universities, not TCC, but 4-year universities. And they give them to those professors, and they look at how students do. And then they correlate that with, did students get an A, a B, a C, or a D, or an F in the class? And so 5s are supposed to equate to an A in college biology. So if you get a 5 on this, their data suggests that students that were scoring like you in college classes all over the country, they were all making A's. So they'll look at this and they'll be like, all right, here's how many you got right. People that scored like you at the University of Texas got an A in their bio class, and University of Wyoming got an A, and over here an A, and over here an A, and over here an A. So they're supposed to correlate. But they're actually giving professors these exact questions and testing them out on their students. Now, here's what's sketchy about that. If I'm a professor, let's say I put it on the final. I was only in class for a semester. It's like Bio 1 is from August to December. If you put it on a unit test, I might be asking you a question like some of these questions are kind of hard now, but if I asked you that enzyme question at the end of the enzyme unit while it's still fresh, that's easier for you, right? Like me asking you an enzyme question right after we did enzymes is easier back in November than it is me asking you an enzyme question now in May. So it's still not quite comparable because the professors can use it in any way they want. They can put it on a unit test, and then you're having to score as well as their kids on a unit test at an end of the year test. Even if it's on their final, Bio 1 is a one-semester class, so it's only covering half the course. AP Bio covers Bio 1, Bio 2, Bio 1 lab, and Bio 2 lab. So for it to be truly the same, they would have to take a final over 4 classes. That's what AP Bio is. But that's how they do it. And then they probably have some fudge factor for that. So it might even be like, well, some of the kids got Bs, but it was on a one-semester class. You know what I mean? So that's how it's supposed to correlate. So every once in a while, they do a new study, and they see how it correlates, and all of a sudden they'll change the cut points. And so all of a sudden, one year, they'll start giving out more 5s or fewer 5s. So there have been years where they gave out 40% 1s in AP Bio. Currently, they give out 20% 1s. So it used to be double because they'd done some college study, and they're like, well, the test is too easy. Here's how hard it is to make a 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So every once in a while, they change the cut points. You guys are in a pretty good spot as far as cut points. Up until last year, AP Bio was the hardest 5 of all AP exams. It's like right in the middle of the pack. So it used to be that there were like 6% 5s, and AP Bio and AP Human were about equal on 5s, whereas like say AP English, 20% of students get a 5. BC Calculus, 40% of students get a 5. So it's just how they tier it. So there are tests that are easier. You can't compare like this teacher teaching this and their pass rate is this and this teacher teaches this. It's like those are different subjects and like that's just easier than this. AP Psych, I think you guys take that class for a year. It's a one-semester class in college. AP Bio, you take for a year. It's 4 classes in college. So we should, in theory, be covering like 4 times as much stuff as AP Psych. So they're not all the same. Other questions? Hey. Okay, cool. Thank you. All right. So next up, Hardy-Weinberg is pretty much guaranteed, and Hardy-Weinberg is predictable. You're always going to have 2, maybe 3 points worth of Hardy-Weinberg stuff. They'll ask you some math, and then they'll ask you some Hardy-Weinberg theory. Chi-square math is more unpredictable. You'll have to do a null hypothesis, and that's it 1 year, and then another year it'll show up on like free response. So chi-square is very much more like hit or miss, whereas Hardy-Weinberg is like a steady 3 points. So, real quick, on a piece of paper, or talk with somebody nearby, what were the 5 Hardy-Weinberg rules? All right, somebody give me one. Huh? no migration. As I've said before, I always write them in certain orders sometimes, but the actual order doesn't matter. Somebody give me another one. Yeah. No selective mating. No selective mating. Yeah, I want a big population. So I'll say want big pop.
Is it no mutation?
Yep, no mutations. And one other one, this is the evolution unit. Yeah, no natural or artificial selection. All right, so real quick, remind me what artificial selection is. Yeah, when we as humans, as scientists, when we decide something survives and not nature. So the easiest example of this would be dog breeds. There are several dog breeds that out in the wild, they might make it, and there are many dog breeds that wouldn't last the weekend out in the wild. So yeah, I always make fun of pugs, chihuahuas. Out in the wild, a chihuahua would yap one too many times, and by the end of the day, some real dog like a German Shepherd would just stomp that thing out. So artificial selection. If any of y'all have had life-saving surgery, as a wild animal 1,000 years ago, you'd have just died. Like if any of y'all have had your appendix rupture, you would have just died. But because you had your appendix rupture 7 years ago in the U.S., we went in, did surgery, and fixed it. But 1,000 years ago, if your appendix ruptures, you always bleed out and die. So that's artificial selection. All right. What about, there was some more vocab. There's some more vocab that was related to, like, whenever I, let me get a better pen. Whenever I break the rule. So whenever I break the big population rule, there was one major word with like 2 subcategories. And whenever I break the no migration rule, there was a word for that. Does anybody remember any of those words? Or maybe you remember kind of what they are in concept, but you just don't remember what it's called? Or yeah, genetic drift. So is that the no migration rule, or is that the I want a big population? Yeah. So this one, the major category is called genetic drift. They ask 1 point on genetic drift almost every year. The secret to the genetic drift question is genetic drift always has to be random or chance. They'll also often call it a random chance event. So if they're asking you a multiple choice and they're like, which of the following blah, 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 blah. If the answer is genetic drift and I'm trying to define it, they will have the word random or chance or both in there. It's not planned. It's not like I decided to do this. It's more like crap happened and now I'm over here. What were the 2 types of genetic drift that we saw, or one of the 2 types? Yeah, the bottleneck effect. So one type of genetic drift, bless you, is the bottleneck effect. And then there was another effect. Yeah, founder effect. So bottleneck effect is when a random chance event, usually a disaster, shrinks the population down. So I'm breaking the big population rule. And it's usually a chance event like a natural disaster like lava, hurricanes, fire, something like that. So if you have something like Yellowstone National Park and all of a sudden a fire goes in and wipes out like 90% of it, well, now the population of this tree and this animal or whatever just shrank from like this down to like 10%. So that's called the bottleneck effect. What's the likelihood, or why is it random? It was just random. Like, if I'm a tree and the fire goes this way, I burn. If I'm a tree and the wind is going this way, then now the fire like passes me by. And the example I might have given earlier in the year is if I'm some animal living on one of the Hawaiian Islands and like the western half erupts and explodes, whether I live or died was just total chance. It wasn't like I'm more fit or whatever. It's like, no, I was on the west side, so I blew up. Or I was on the east side, so I just didn't. It's not because my fur was the right color or I was super fast or something like that. It's just random chance. What about the founder effect? Huh?
All I remember is the Mars analogy.
Yeah. So it's when a small group migrates to another location. However, that's true. But over here we had this thing called gene flow. And wasn't that when a small group moved from one spot to another? Like they were migrating? So what's the difference between gene flow and founder effect? They're almost the same, but there's one small difference. That's true. So this is more due to chance, whereas this could be like I'm on purpose moving to Spain, or I'm on purpose moving from Australia to the United States or something like that. So that's true. Gene flow can also be random, though. Not really with humans, with other things. Founder is kind of the key. Huh? Yeah, you're the first to the new place. So you are the founders. So for example, gene flow. If I decide to move to Spain, that's gene flow. If by accident I've got some oak tree acorns and they happen to somehow like hitch a ride on a boat accidentally and end up in Spain, but Spain's full of those oak trees, that's still gene flow. So when I have a population of humans on this continent, North America, and we move to this other population of humans on South America, that's gene flow. It's between existing populations. So I'd say between existing or established populations. Here, the founder effect is population to new location. So now, let's say that I just happen to actually, some of us happen to accidentally make it to Antarctica. We weren't even trying, something happens and we get there, and we were the first humans ever there. That would be the founder effect. So you're the first humans in an area. My Mars analogy is pretty good. The only fault with it is us going to Mars would have to be like chance. It wouldn't be that we were like trying to make it there. You know, oh, we're going to get on a spaceship and go, which way? That way. And we happen to end up on Mars as opposed to Venus, as opposed to the moon or something. So gene flow versus founder effect are easy to kind of mix up. All right, the way that you likely see these is if it's free response, they'll give you some scenario and ask you like, why is this population not in Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium? And, you know, they might be like, hey, you're in a situation, this happens, forest fire, whatever, explain why you're not in Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium. And you'll be like, well, forest fire, that's an example of the bottleneck effect. And that breaks the rule where we need a big population. Or I'll say, grapefruits are huge out in nature. Grapefruits are tiny, blah, 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 blah. What's going on? You'll be like, oh, that's artificial selection. And that breaks one of our rules that says you can't have any type of selection. So normally it'll be, here's a scenario, and you go through and you like pick which rule are you breaking. Sometimes on a free response, they'll just be like, hey, name two of the rules, more or less, something like that. All right, so the last thing that we're going to do before class is over, so we're going to try, if it will let me, this Hardy-Weinberg question. So give that one a shot. This is one I just made up, so it's not anywhere. So if you wanted it, you're welcome to take a picture, but it's not like a college board question or anything. On the real AP Bio test, we do give you a formula sheet. So I'll give you the formulas for Hardy-Weinberg also. If I was in a real college class, they probably would just have me memorize them. I don't have to know a lot of equations, so I'd probably just have to memorize it. And then if you're watching the video, I'll switch over to the other camera so you can read the question. Okay, there you go. And for the video, I'll pause it while you work it. And then, so the next time you see me, we'll be done working it, and I'll kind of walk you through it. All right, so let's see what you got. They tell us brown hair is dominant to blonde hair. And they say if I've got 130 brown-haired people in a population of 200, then how many are predicted to be this, this, this? Okay, knowing how many brown-haired people there are doesn't really help me that much. So for example, I know for Hardy-Weinberg that I have to get these down to frequencies. Switch to there. So I know I have to get them down to frequencies. The Hardy-Weinberg equations are in frequencies, like 1.00 is 100%. So if I use the data for brown-haired people, I'd say 130 out of 200. Here's what I would do. So I'd say, all right, that's 65%. But then what I would have is, that means these people have brown hair, big B, and these people have brown hair. So what I would have is I'd have something like this. I'd have P squared plus 2PQ equals 0.65. And that's not very useful. I can't solve for P or Q because I've got like two unknowns. However, if I know how many people have brown hair and it's 65%, then that means 70 out of 200. Blondes, 70 out of 200 is 35%, 0.35. That's useful because now I can say Q squared is 0.35. All right, once I know that, square root of 0.35 equals 0.59. So if I square root both sides, Q equals 0.59. All right, so Q is 0.59. And I know that these two have to add up to a flat 1. So that means this has got to be 41, 0.41. And once I've got that, I can answer anything that they want to ask me. So if for part A, we'll say, I know it doesn't have a label, but what's the predicted frequency of heterozygotes? Well, heterozygous is 2PQ. So I would just say 2 times 0.41 times 0.59. That's how many heps. What about homozygous dominant? Well, homozygous dominant is P squared. So P squared is, homozygous dominant is whatever 0.41 squared is. What about homozygous recessive? That's Q squared. That'd be 0.59 squared. So whatever those happen to be, those would be my answers. If I'm answering on a free response, usually a couple sig figs is all you need. So if it was like Q was 0.000000012345, obviously I don't round that to 0.00. I'd keep like 2 sig figs. Remember, zeros don't count if they're at the beginning for sig figs. So I kind of do it that way. But if I'm doing a free response, they normally accept a range. So if you're like, well, I did 0.591, and so my answer is very, very slightly different, it'll be fine. They'll have an answer, and they'll be like, if students wrote between these numbers or these numbers, we give it to them. So, all right. Good luck if you guys are taking a test for AP before I see you next. So government on Monday, and yeah, seemed like on Tuesday there wasn't one that you guys would take. So see ya.